The air was heavy with the smell of dust and old wood as Karen stepped out of her car. Before her stretched the farm she had inherited, a vast land overtaken by silence and weeds. The barn leaned tiredly, its paint long stripped away by rain and wind. Rusted machinery stood like abandoned giants, frozen in time. For a moment, she simply stood still, overwhelmed by the weight of history pressing against her chest. She had not set foot here in years, not since her father's passing. Memories of childhood summers flickered in her mind, running through golden fields, feeding chickens with her grandmother, and hearing stories about resilience. But now, the land was unrecognizable. It was no longer the farm she remembered, but a ghost of what once was. That realization stung deeply, awakening both grief and longing. Neighbors had warned her it wasn't worth it. Sell it, they had said. No one can revive that place anymore. The soil had hardened, the fences collapsed, and the economy had shifted to favor massive corporations. But Karen couldn't bring herself to give up so easily. Something inside her resisted the idea of erasing her family's story with a transaction. As she walked closer to the house, the creaking porch greeted her like a voice from the past. Dust covered every corner, and broken glass crunched beneath her shoes. The silence was deafening, yet it held a kind of invitational, unspoken challenge. Could she breathe life into this forgotten place? Could she, at 50, start again? Karen ran her hand across the wooden frame of the doorway, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes, hearing echoes of laughter from long ago. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just a farm. It was her inheritance, not only of land but of purpose. She had been given a chance to choose, abandon, or fight. The decision wasn't clear yet. The idea of staying seemed daunting, even impossible. She had no farming skills, no plan, and no certainty of success. All she had was a stubborn heart and a burning question. What if she tried? That question, fragile but persistent, began to grow in her mind. And so, as night fell over the empty fields, Karen whispered a promise to herself. She would not walk away, not yet. The farm was broken, but so was she. Maybe, just maybe, by healing this land, she could also heal something within her. The next morning, Karen woke to the smell of old wood and the sound of birds she had almost forgotten existed. The light stretched across the fields, revealing the overgrowth in harsh detail. Tall weeds swayed in the breeze, covering what once had been fertile ground. The sight was discouraging, but it also lit a spark. She grabbed a notebook and began writing ideas, no matter how unrealistic they seemed. Her first thought was to sell part of the land, using the money to restore the house. Another idea was to rent the fields to a local farmer, though that meant letting go of her control. But as she listed the options, none of them felt right. Deep down, she didn't want shortcuts. She wanted to restore the place with her own hands, even if she failed trying. Later that day, she walked into the nearby town. She visited the small supply store, where the owner recognized her last name instantly. "Your father's farm?" he asked, raising his brows. "That place hasn't been touched in years." His words were meant as caution, but Karen heard them as motivation. She nodded politely, hiding the storm of determination brewing inside her. On her way back, she stopped by a neighbor's property. Mr. Dawson, a man in his 60s, leaned on his fence and shook his head when she mentioned her plans. "You'll only waste your time. Karen, farming's not what it used to be." His words cut deep, but she forced a smile. She wasn't ready to argue, but something inside her whispered, "Prove him wrong." That evening, Karen wandered the fields again, this time looking closer. Beneath the weeds, she saw glimpses of soil, dark and promising, though tired. She bent down, letting the earth crumble between her fingers. It wasn't completely dead. Maybe, with care, it could live again. That realization sent a jolt of hope through her veins. She returned to the house with a small plan forming. Tomorrow, she would begin clearing a section of land. Nothing grand, just a corner where she could test herself. The idea felt almost childish, but it gave her something to hold on to. A first step, no matter how small, was better than standing still. And as the night drew close, Karen lit a candle and stared at her notebook of half-formed plans. For the first time in years, she felt alive with possibility. The farm had tested her already, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Something told her the journey had just begun. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees carried her back to childhood. Karen sat on the porch steps, eyes closed, allowing herself to remember. She saw herself as a little girl, barefoot, chasing fireflies at dusk. She remembered her father's rough hands lifting her to see the stars and her grandmother's steady voice teaching her about patience and faith. Those memories flooded her heart with warmth and sorrow. It struck her that the farm was more than soil and wood. It was a vessel of her family's legacy, carrying their joys and struggles within its boundaries. To let it rot would feel like betraying everything they had endured. This realization made her spine straighten. She couldn't let the past vanish so easily. Inside the house, Karen found an old chest in the attic, covered in dust and cobwebs. She opened it carefully and discovered photographs, letters, and tools once used by her father. Holding the photographs, she felt the weight of generations staring back at her. Each face seemed to ask her the same question. Will you continue what we started? Tears welled in her eyes as she placed the pictures on the table. They weren't just reminders, they were encouragement. Her father had worked these fields with perseverance. Her grandmother had nurtured life here with her own hands. If they could endure, perhaps she could too. The thought filled her with renewed strength. Later that afternoon, she explored the barn. The smell of old hay and rust filled her lungs, almost suffocating but oddly comforting. She ran her hand over a broken plow, imagining her father repairing it late into the night. Every corner spoke to her. Every crack in the wood carried a story. The farm wasn't silent at all, it was speaking to her, urging her to fight. Standing in the middle of the barn, Karen felt both small and powerful. She wasn't sure how to fix everything, but she knew she couldn't abandon it. She whispered to the shadows, "I'll try. I don't know how, but I'll try." The words echoed, grounding her in determination. And so, as the sun dipped low, she decided the farm deserved another chance. Just like her, both broken, both waiting for someone to believe in them again, and she would not turn away. One evening, Karen sat with her laptop at the old kitchen table, searching for inspiration. She typed "farming today" into the search bar, unsure of what she would find. Among the articles about industrial agriculture, one phrase stood out: organic farming. She clicked eagerly, her eyes widening as she read. The concept of working with nature instead of against it stirred something inside. She learned that organic farming wasn't just about avoiding chemicals. It was about healing the soil, nurturing biodiversity, and creating food that nourished both body and spirit. The more she read, the more it resonated with her. It felt like a path that honored her family's traditions while embracing something new. It wasn't just farming, it was philosophy. That the idea of turning the neglected farm into an organic haven seemed almost impossible. Yet it filled her with excitement she hadn't felt in years. She imagined rows of vegetables, vibrant and clean, chickens roaming freely, and neighbors once skeptical now seeking her produce. The vision took root in her mind like a seed ready to sprout. That night, she scribbled plans in her notebook: composting, crop rotation, natural pest control, concepts foreign to her but thrilling. She didn't understand all the details, but she was determined to learn. This wasn't only about reviving land, it was about creating something meaningful, something future generations could respect. The next morning, Karen drove to the town library. She left with an armful of books on sustainable agriculture and a heart beating faster than it had in years. Each page she turned was a step closer to a new identity. She was no longer just a woman inheriting land. She was a woman daring to transform it. Neighbors continued to doubt her. Of course, Mr. Dawson shook his head again when she mentioned her organic dream. Too much work, too little reward, he muttered. But Karen no longer absorbed his doubt. She held the books tighter, hearing a different voice within herself. You can learn, you can do this. And as she placed the first stack of books on her kitchen table, Karen smiled. The old farm didn't need to return to what it once was. It could become something entirely new, and so could she. Karen enrolled in a local course on sustainable agriculture, feeling both nervous and excited. On the first day, she walked into the classroom, surrounded mostly by younger students. Their eager conversations about farming practices made her feel out of place. Yet, as the instructor welcomed everyone, she reminded herself that learning had no age. She sat tall, ready to absorb every word. The class was more challenging than she expected. Terminology like cover crops and soil amendments sounded foreign, almost like another language. But she filled pages of her notebook with notes, determined not to miss a thing. Her hands cramped from writing, yet her heart swelled with pride. She was doing it. She was learning. At night, back at the farmhouse, Karen logged into online courses as well. The glow of the computer screen illuminated her tired face as she watched tutorials on composting and irrigation. Sometimes she paused the video repeatedly, struggling to understand. Still, she pressed on. Each small concept understood felt like a victory. Doubt crept in often. She asked herself, what if I'm too old for this? What if I fail? Yet each time, she reminded herself of her grandmother's steady hands, her father's perseverance. She wasn't only studying for herself, she was carrying their legacy forward, learning so the farm might live again. Days turned into weeks, and her confidence grew. She began practicing what she learned, starting with small compost piles in the backyard. The earthy smell of decomposition filled the air, and for the first time, she felt she was giving something back to the land. It was humble, but it was a beginning. Her classmates noticed her determination. One of them, a young man named Alex, even offered to visit the farm to help her apply what she was learning. Karen hesitated but accepted, realizing she didn't have to do everything alone. This was not just about knowledge but also about community. As she stood by her first compost heap, hands dirty and spirit alive, Karen realized something profound. She wasn't just learning about farming, she was learning about herself, the patience, the resilience, and the courage to start anew. And that was only the beginning. The first day Karen set foot on the fields with tools in hand, she felt both determination and fear. The land was stubborn, cracked by years of neglect and drought. Weeds tangled like chains across the earth, making every step a battle. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she swung her hoe, tearing at the ground. The silence of the soil seemed to resist her efforts. She remembered a lecture about soil needing to breathe again. That phrase echoed as she dug into the hardened ground, each strike like a plea for renewal. At first, the progress seemed invisible, but slowly, patches of dark earth emerged beneath the weeds. The smell of raw soil rose, earthy and alive. A faint smile touched her lips. Karen built her first compost pile nearby, layering food scraps, leaves, and manure she bought from a neighboring farm. The scent was pungent, almost unbearable at times, but she read that this smell was proof of life at work. She chose to see it as a promise of transformation. She would nurture the land back, one handful at a time. Each evening, her body ached from hours of labor. Her hands, once soft from city life, became rough and blistered. Yet, the pain felt strangely rewarding. It reminded her she was building something from the ground up, reclaiming both the soil and her spirit. Exhaustion became a badge of honor as she worked. Doubts whispered constantly, "It's too late. You don't know enough." She silenced them by focusing on small victories. A corner cleared, a patch of compost steaming, a bird returning to peck at the freshly turned ground. Little signs that the farm was beginning to breathe again. One evening, Karen paused to watch the sunset bleed across the horizon. For the first time, she saw the farm not as ruins, but as a canvas, a place where change could be painted slowly, stroke by stroke. She breathed deeply, the air carrying the faintest scent of growth. Hope whispered softly within her, and as she walked back to the house, Karen felt the soil watching her, almost waiting. The farm was no longer only a burden. It was a partner in her fight for renewal. Together, they would rise. The news spread quickly in town. Karen was trying to revive her family's farm. Some laughed, others shook their heads in disbelief. At the grocery store, she overheard whispers, "She won't last a month." The words stung, but she pretended not to care. Still, doubt lingered like a shadow she couldn't escape. Mr. Dawson, her neighbor, stopped by one afternoon. He leaned on his truck, smirking as he watched her hauling buckets of compost. "Karen, you're wasting your strength. Farming today belongs to machines and chemicals, not dreams." His tone was dismissive, almost pitying. For a moment, her resolve wavered. She clenched her fists tightly. That night, Karen sat at her kitchen table, staring at the notes from her classes. She wondered if Dawson was right. The costs, the effort, the long hours, it all seemed overwhelming. But then she remembered her grandmother's gentle voice, telling her that anything worth keeping required hard work. Tears blurred her vision, but determination burned again. Instead of quitting, she wrote a new list of goals. Small ones: clear another plot, improve her compost, study irrigation methods. She decided she wouldn't measure success by acres or money but by persistence. If the soil could change slowly, so could she. That thought eased her restless heart. The next morning, Karen returned to the field with renewed fire. She worked harder than ever, pushing past exhaustion. Sweat drenched her clothes, but her rhythm grew steady. Each swing of her hoe became an answer to the voices of doubt. Every breath carried a silent vow. I will not stop. Days later, she visited the farmer's market, not to sell, but to observe. She studied how others displayed their produce, how customers asked about organic labels with curiosity. The sight fueled her vision, showing her a future she could strive toward. It was distant, but it was real. And as Karen walked home that evening, the whispers of doubt still followed her. But now, her steps were louder, firmer. For every voice that said she couldn't, her heart answered back, watch me try. Weeks passed, and Karen's efforts began to show. One morning, as she bent to check the soil, a small green shoot pierced the earth. She gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was her first sprout, fragile yet defiant. Kneeling in the dirt, she touched it gently, as if cradling a newborn life. Tears filled her eyes. The sprouts multiplied over the next day's tiny leaves, pushing through the soil. Lettuce, kale, and beans, all carefully nurtured from her compost. Each new growth felt like a miracle, proof that her hard work was not in vain. For the first time, the land looked alive, whispering back to her with signs of hope. Neighbors began to notice. Passing cars slowed, curious eyes peering at the green patches. Mr. Dawson, skeptical as always, raised his brows but said nothing. Karen smiled silently, knowing the sight spoke louder than any words. The farm, once a symbol of decay, was now stirring with renewal. Karen kept meticulous notes of every step. She studied the plants daily, recording their growth, adjusting water and sunlight. Her classes suddenly made sense, knowledge turning into practice. The farm became her classroom, the soil her textbook. Mistakes happened, but each one was a teacher, guiding her hand with patience. Late one evening, she cooked her first salad using leaves from her small garden. The taste was sharp, fresh, almost electric. It wasn't just food, it was proof of her resilience, a reward earned through sweat and faith. She savored each bite slowly, smiling through quiet tears of pride. Still, the sprouts were fragile. A storm one night nearly flattened them, reminding her how fragile success could be. But she rushed out in the rain, shielding them with tarps, and her own body, drenched and shivering, she whispered, I won't let you die. And the sprouts survived. As dawn broke, the farm glistened with droplets of rain, the shoots standing tall. Karen realized she had found her first real victory. The sprouts were small, but they carried something immense, proof that beginnings, no matter how fragile, could survive. Karen harvested her first basket of vegetables, arranging them neatly with pride. They weren't perfect, smaller than store produce, with blemishes here and there, but they were hers. With trembling hands, she packed them into her car and drove to the local farmer's market. Her heart raced with anticipation. She set up a modest table, spreading a cloth and laying out the produce carefully. At first, people walked by without stopping. A few glanced but moved on quickly. When someone finally picked up a head of lettuce, they frowned at the uneven leaves. How much? They asked, only to shake their head and walk away. Hours passed with little success. Karen smiled at everyone, trying to explain that her vegetables were organic, grown without chemicals. Some nodded politely but still chose the larger, shinier produce from other vendors. Each rejection cut into her hope like a blade. Doubt crept back, whispering cruelly in her mind. By midday, she had sold only 2 baskets. Her heart sank as she packed up, hands trembling with disappointment. On the drive home, silence filled the car. Tears welled, but she bit her lip, refusing to let despair win. She told herself this was just the beginning, not the end. Still, the weight of rejection pressed heavily. Back at the farmhouse, Karen sat on the porch, staring at the unsold vegetables. Maybe they're right, she whispered, voice breaking. Maybe this is too much. The farm around her seemed quiet again, as if holding its breath. For the first time, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. That night, she opened her grandmother's letters again, searching for strength. One line struck her. The worth of our work is not always seen at once, but it will show in time. Karen clung to those words, letting them soften her pain. They were a lifeline in the storm of doubt. And as the moon rose high, she whispered to the empty fields, I'll try again. Her heart was battered, but not broken. The rejections had cut deep, but they would not end her journey. Karen tossed and turned in bed, her mind replaying the day's failures. The sting of rejection clung to her like a shadow. She considered quitting, selling the farm, and returning to her old life. The thought felt like relief for a moment, but then a deeper sorrow surfaced. To give up now would mean silencing everything she had fought for. She rose and walked outside, the cool night air brushing her face. The farm lay quiet, bathed in silver moonlight. She stood in the middle of the field, the soil beneath her bare feet, and let the silence sink into her bones. She whispered to herself, "Is this really the end?" The night gave no answer. Her eyes drifted to the barn, where the old tools rested in silence. She remembered her father repairing equipment late into the night, refusing to stop until the job was done. His determination echoed in her heart. She realized she carried that same spirit, buried but not gone. Her chest tightened with emotion. Karen returned to the house and pulled out her notebook. She flipped through pages of lessons, goals, and scribbled dreams. Her pen trembled as she wrote a single word in bold letters: continue. She stared at it until her tears blurred the ink. It wasn't just a decision, it was a vow to herself and to the land. Exhausted, she collapsed into a chair, head in her hands. She whispered her fears into the empty room, confessing her loneliness and doubt. Yet, within the silence, she felt something stir, a faint warmth, a quiet courage, rising again. She realized she wasn't fighting alone. The farm was fighting with her. By dawn, Karen had made her choice. She would not quit. She would rise earlier, work harder, and learn from every failure. The road ahead was long, but she was no longer afraid of its weight. Failure would not define her. Persistence would. And as the sun crept over the horizon, painting the fields with gold, Karen smiled through weary eyes. She had chosen her path, and she would walk it no matter how many storms lay ahead. Karen woke before dawn, stepping outside as mist clung to the fields. The rows of vegetables stretched across the land, stronger now than ever before. She touched the leaves with care, feeling their firm resistance beneath her fingertips. The soil smelled rich, alive, a reminder of months of effort. Her heart swelled with quiet pride. This season's harvest was larger, brighter, healthier. She carried baskets filled with tomatoes, peppers, and beans, her arms aching from their weight. At the market, her table looked fuller, more inviting. Customers stopped, asked questions, and listened closely when she explained her organic methods. Some even returned later, eager for more. Each sale was more than money. It was validation. The farm was no longer a forgotten relic. It was producing life again. Karen began to see smiles on the faces of people eating her vegetables. Their compliments filled her with warmth, like sunlight after endless rain. The farm was giving back, slowly but surely. Her routine grew steadier. Days began before sunrise and ended long after dark. Though exhaustion still pressed on her shoulders, it no longer felt heavy. Every blister and sore muscle carried meaning. She had built this with her own hands, step by step, season by season. That realization gave her strength. The soil itself seemed to reflect her resilience. Where once it was barren, now it pulsed with vitality. Birds returned, insects hummed, and wildflowers grew along the edges of her fields. The land was not only healing, it was celebrating. Karen felt herself part of something greater, woven into nature's rhythm again. Even Mr. Dawson stopped by one afternoon, standing quietly at the edge of her field. He didn't offer criticism this time. Instead, he gave a small nod, almost respectful, before walking away. That gesture, though wordless, was powerful. For Karen, it felt like recognition of her fight. That as she watched the sun dip low, painting her fields in gold, Karen smiled. The farm was thriving, and so was she. The resilience she planted in the soil had rooted itself in her soul. Together, they were growing stronger every day. Word of Karen's success began to spread across town. People spoke of her produce at church gatherings and community meetings. Her vegetables appeared on dinner tables, praised for their flavor and freshness. The once skeptical community now looked at her with curiosity and admiration. Slowly, the tide of opinion was shifting. One afternoon, a mother brought her children to the farm. She wanted them to see where real food came from. Karen welcomed them warmly, guiding the children through the rows of vegetables. Their laughter filled the air as they picked carrots straight from the ground. Karen's heart glowed with joy at their wonder. Soon, others asked to visit as well. Retirees wanted to learn her methods. Young families sought healthier food. And even local schools expressed interest in field trips. Karen realized her farm was becoming more than a business. It was turning into a gathering place, a living classroom of renewal and hope. The change was even more personal when Mr. Dawson appeared again. This time, He asked her questions. How did she manage pests without chemicals? What techniques helped her soil recover? His voice carried no mockery, only genuine interest. Karen answered kindly, hiding her surprise but feeling proud. She had earned his respect. With each new visitor, Karen discovered another layer of purpose. She wasn't just growing food, she was nurturing connections. The farm became a bridge between people, offering not just vegetables but inspiration. Each handshake and smile reminded her that she was no longer alone in this journey. The farmhouse itself began to change. Friends and neighbors helped repair the porch, repaint the barn, and mend fences. What was once crumbling now looked alive again. Karen realized she had not only restored the soil but had rekindled a sense of community. The farm was no longer forgotten, it was cherished. As she stood at the gate one evening, watching families leave with baskets of produce, Karen felt something deep and certain. She had rebuilt more than land. She had helped rebuild hearts. And in doing so, she had finally found her place again. A turning point came when a local restaurant approached her. The owner, impressed by her produce at the market, asked if she could supply vegetables weekly. Karen hesitated, her mind racing with doubts. Could she handle the demand? Could she meet expectations? Still, she agreed, sensing this was the next step. Delivering her first batch felt surreal. She carried crates of tomatoes and greens into the kitchen, where chefs inspected them closely. Their approving nods sent relief coursing through her. The thought of strangers enjoying meals made from her vegetables filled her with pride. It was more than food, it was her journey served on plates. The restaurant soon added her name to the menu, locally grown by Karen's farm. Seeing it printed felt like a dream. Diners asked about her, curious to know the woman behind the produce. Karen blushed when she heard their compliments. For years she had felt invisible. Now, her work was celebrated. As the partnership grew, so did her confidence. She began experimenting with new crops, expanding her fields carefully. Each harvest was an opportunity to refine her craft. She no longer felt like a beginner fumbling through lessons. She felt like a farmer, skilled, purposeful, and proud. That transformation was profound. The money she earned allowed her to invest back into the farm. She repaired irrigation systems, bought better tools, and restored the farmhouse roof. Each improvement reminded her how far she had come. What was once decaying now shone with possibility. The farm itself mirrored her growth. Her story spread beyond the town. Local newspapers wrote about her, framing her as an example of resilience and renewal. Neighbors congratulated her. Strangers stopped to shake her hand. She had become a symbol, not just of farming, but of second chances. Karen carried that role with humble pride. And as she sat in the restaurant one evening, eating a meal prepared with her own produce, Karen realized something. She was no longer simply reviving a farm. She was feeding lives, nurturing dreams, and planting seeds of hope in others. By the next season, the farm looked unrecognizable. Rows of vegetables thrived, fruit trees blossomed, and chickens clucked happily in their coops. The barn, once decaying, stood proud with a fresh coat of red paint. The air buzzed with life, echoing with voices of volunteers and visitors who came to help. It was reborn. Karen often walked the fields at sunrise, her boots pressing into soft, fertile soil. She marveled at how the land had transformed, recalling the barren ground she once feared. The sound of bees filled the air, the fragrance of flowers mingled with fresh earth. Every sense reminded her that the farm had come back to life. Children now ran freely through the fields, laughing as they picked strawberries. Families gathered under the old oak tree for picnics. The farm had become more than hers. It belonged to everyone who believed in its rebirth. Karen felt a surge of gratitude each time she saw others cherish the place as deeply as she did. Workshops became common. Karen hosted classes on composting, organic techniques, and sustainable living. She stood before groups with confidence, her once shaky voice now steady. Each time she taught, she saw herself in the eyes of those listening, searching for hope, for purpose, for renewal. The cycle of inspiration grew endlessly. Financially, the farm no longer struggled. Sales flowed steadily from markets, restaurants, and direct visitors. But Karen realized the true wealth wasn't money. It was the joy etched into faces, the laughter echoing across fields, the quiet pride in knowing she had kept her family's legacy alive. That was priceless. Even on hard days, when crops failed or weather struck cruelly, she no longer felt despair. She had built resilience within herself and within the farm. Every challenge was a lesson, every setback a chance to rise again. That strength carried her forward with unshakable faith. And as she gazed at the fields glowing under twilight, Karen understood the farm had been reborn, but so had she. Together, they were no longer broken, they were whole. On the anniversary of her arrival at the farm, Karen stood in the same spot she once had. She remembered the silence, the weeds, the rusted machines. Now, the scene before her was unrecognizable. The fields stretched green and abundant, alive with sound and color. Her heart swelled with gratitude beyond words. She reflected on the journey, the doubts, the rejections, the storms endured. Each moment of pain had carved strength into her soul. Every tear shed had watered seeds of resilience. She realized that the farm's rebirth was not separate from her own. They had healed each other, root by root, heart by heart. Her hands, once soft, were now strong, carrying the history of labor and love. Her spirit, once uncertain, was steady, glowing with quiet confidence. At 50, she had found her true beginning, not an ending. The farm had given her more than purpose, it had given her back herself. As families arrived that afternoon for a harvest celebration, Karen welcomed them with open arms. Tables overflowed with her produce, music filled the air, and laughter echoed across the fields. She watched children dance, neighbors smile, and strangers connect. The farm had become a living symbol of community, hope, and second chances. When the sun began to set, Karen raised a glass of apple cider. Her voice, steady and strong, carried across the crowd. She thanked them, not just for supporting her, but for believing in the farm's renewal. In their eyes, she saw a reflection of her own journey, courage, perseverance, and faith. Later, alone under the stars, Karen sat quietly on the porch. She breathed deeply, letting the night air fill her lungs. For the first time in years, she felt no lingering fear, no nagging doubt, only peace. As if the land itself whispered back to her, "We made it." And with tears of joy glistening in her eyes, Karen smiled. She had not only revived the farm, she had discovered the power of renewal. And that lesson, she knew, would live on long after her footsteps faded. Karen thought she was saving a farm, but in truth, the farm was saving her. And maybe, just maybe, the same soil of renewal waits for all of us if we dare to begin again.